The hardest truth to swallow is anything that conflicts with our preconceived notions, our biases, our long-held beliefs, anything which challenges or threatens the ego, the established identity, the false persona. The hardest truth to swallow is often that which holds you accountable for your own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, placing the responsibility on you and you alone to change. When someone says something which you find disagreeable, pay close attention to your emotional state. Notice whether or not you're angry, upset, offended, whether or not you take it deeply personal. Because it's one thing to simply disagree, but it's something altogether different to be defensive. When we're defensive, it's not so much the idea that we defend, but the identity that we have invested upon that idea. So when someone challenges our beliefs or criticizes them, that identity feels threatened. And because we mistake that identity for who we are, we feel that we are being threatened. And so we're quick to defend. But that person may be offering us some wisdom, some insight, some truth, which we immediately reject because it threatens our sense of identity, or because accepting that truth would mean having to accept some responsibility. How many times do we do that? How many times do we reject something without really listening, without really considering, without the willingness to truly understand? How many times have we rejected truth because it threatens our identity or makes us accountable? Probably we don't even know how many times, because we weren't even paying attention. We weren't really listening, so we don't even know what truth we may have missed. How many times do we make assumptions? How many times do we misinterpret or misunderstand because we're not really listening? How many times does someone say something but we hear something else instead? Or we assume that what they said implies something else, something they didn't actually say. How many times have we put words in other people's mouths, misquoted them, or taken what they say completely out of context? And again, you probably don't know because we're often unaware that we do this. I've learned not to argue with people because there's really no point to it. Arguing is often so emotionally charged that there's very little room for rational understanding. People are so busy defending their identities that they don't really listen to one another. But when there's arguing, I tend to listen, to observe rather than engage. And what I observe quite often is that we often don't hear what the other person is really saying. We will often misunderstand. We will twist and distort their words. We make assumptions, sometimes assuming the very opposite of what the other person is saying. And so we may wind up disagreeing, not so much with what the person is actually saying, but with our clouded interpretation of what we assumed they're saying. And if we're not certain of what someone is saying, we should ask for clarification rather than make our own assumptions. Because again, often we might be disagreeing with our own assumption or interpretation rather than what the other person is actually saying. So learn to pay attention without reacting. Listen attentively without defending. Be willing to consider what someone is telling you. Take a moment to really look at it, examine it, process it. Don't immediately reject, but after some thought, some real consideration, if it turns out to be inaccurate or false, then you can let it go. But be aware that someone may be offering you some wisdom or truth that you would greatly benefit from if you weren't so busy defending your false identity. So learn to be less attached to that identity. Practice humility. Seek to understand. Listen to hear. Ask rather than assume. Be willing to learn something new. Be willing to be corrected. Be willing even to discard your beliefs in light of new evidence. Don't be so quick to dismiss what you don't understand. And don't be so quick to accept what you find pleasing. Don't assume to be certain. Take time to examine. Take time to look deeply. Take time to listen intently. Try to see it from every possible angle and to broaden your perspective.
If you find this content valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.